Hi dear community, how are you? Welcome to MSRS Uncanny. In this new episode, in the videos in which I explain literary pieces to you, I have decided to bring you the Horlà by Guy de Maupassant. I hope I have pronounced it well because I'm not a good French speaker. So, as I said, this is a story written by a French writer in the 19th century, but there are a lot of things we have to talk about because it is a very complex story, and of course it is a story I categorize as belonging to the Gothic. Will you stay with me? First of all, cheers. Water this time because of the story. If you read it, you know what I'm talking about. If you like the content, please consider subscribing and giving me a like. Cheers. Okay, so the first part of the analysis is going to deal with the story from a formalist perspective. Shall we make a checklist? Okay, the first item would be the form of the story, which is written in the form of a journal. The author has decided to tell us the action and to narrate the action step by step, day by day, in chronological order, which gives it a very linear perspective. So that would be the first thing. When you first come in contact with the story, you notice that it is like a journal. There's a date and there's some action or narrative taking place in that date, and so on and so forth. The second thing is the images. Formalism pays a lot of attention to images, and the story is full of visual images. Not as many of other sort of images, tactile or olfactory, but very many visual images. So what you get in your mind is a very visual picture of everything that is taking place. The other thing would be whatever is sent to the foreground, which for me is the way in which the author describes his mental states, the way in which he describes his deterioration and how he feels he is no longer himself. So probably these descriptions come to the foreground more than any other thing. Now, for the functionalist perspective, another checklist. The first thing we have to bear in mind is the context of production of the story. It is, of course, Europe, 19th century. That's why I very much connected to the Gothic genre. And one of the things that catches your attention as you read it is that the author seems to imply that this evil entity is coming from Brazil. Apparently, there is a connection between America, South America, and mysterious events taking place, so the setting would be one of the things to bear in mind. We have to consider also the fact that when this story was written, especially in France, there was still a residue of the slave trade, and many of the slaves came from Brazil. Of course, they came by boat. There was no plane or anything, so they came by boat. And the creature, entity, called the Horlà, comes from Brazil. So this is very important, and one has to bear this in mind. The second thing is, again, as for the context of production, referring to the time. Because at the time when the story was written, there was a full swing of certain practices which were very akin to looking at the unknown or the spirit world. And if I mention to you Allan Kardec, maybe you have an idea of what I'm talking about. Have you ever played the Ouija with the board? Well, this equals a séance in which you summon the spirits of the dead. If you actually do it more according to spiritism or Allan Kardec's vision, you need a medium. A medium would be a professional person in charge of leading the seance and connecting to the spirits. In the story, what we get is an episode of mesmerism, which was very much in fashion at that time and which dealt with hypnotism. Mesmerizing and hypnotizing were very similar, and one of the characters in the story, one of the secondary characters, gets mesmerized, and so the narrator of the story becomes really obsessed with this idea that there are things he cannot know through the senses, the bodily senses. He even talks to an old man who tells him, you can see and touch many things, but there are things you cannot see and cannot touch. And does it mean they are not there? This connects directly to the title of the story, the Horlà, which is a neologism. A neologism is a made-up word for a certain purpose. In this case, Hor means outside and La means beyond. The two words together would be something like out there beyond. Somewhere. Because this thing comes from out there somewhere. We don't know where. Okay, but this was the idea. And then all of this contributes to the atmosphere of mystery and to the atmosphere which is, for me, connected to the Gothic. And now we should have a checklist of the Gothic. The story portrays a character who, in the end, is trapped. Trapped in a bedroom, trapped in a house, because he feels that if he leaves that house, he is going to be attacked by this entity. The problem is the entity ends up being inside the house, so there's no way to break free. Again, everything that takes place in the negative area, when he feels sleep paralysis and he feels he is being attacked most violently, and when he notices that whatever liquid he has in his bedroom, whether it be water or milk, disappears. It happens during the night, when he is asleep, because apparently this entity drinks liquids, which is another thing that contributes to the horror feeling, because it is something that is going to destroy all of us. If this entity takes over the earth, they, he, she, whatever it is going to consume the liquids of the earth, and this is very bad for everyone. We know this. So we have entrapment, we have horror, and we also have this supernatural vision of the entity, because nobody can describe or tell what it is. It comes from out there, beyond, somewhere, and nobody knows what it is. So it ends up being supernatural, or at least this is what the main character thinks. The narrator thinks it's supernatural, and he even begins to ponder whether this creature might come from the outer area of space. Outer space, another planet, another world, another dimension even. And you know what this brought to my mind? Predator, the movie, because these entities that come from outer space can turn themselves into transparent things, some sort of air that you see waving in the jungle, but you cannot quite see what it is. If you pay attention to the description of this entity in the story, it turns into air, because nobody can see it, but somehow it interrupts the flow of light. And this is one of the episodes in the story in which the narrator cannot see his image on the mirror. The mirror again. So that would be as far as the Gothic is concerned. Now, for the psychological approaches. We should pay attention to a number of things. The first one is, when everything begins, he is not feeling quite like himself, and he attributes this to several options, but none of them seem to satisfy his explanations, and so he ends up paying attention to whatever is happening around him, and he finally comes to the conclusion that there is something or someone attacking him. So at a certain point in the story, he talks about possession. He feels he is being possessed because the entity commands him to go, for example, and eat strawberries from the garden when he was not clearly thinking of doing that, and suddenly he finds himself following the creature's will. This leads, of course, to confusion and to hallucinations, maybe, because if we think that he is being attacked by a creature, then everything that is happening can be attributed to that creature. But if it's not like that, he is hallucinating. He is thinking that the water disappears and maybe he's the one drinking it. He feels sick for some other reason other than being attacked. And this is also much stressed by the fact that he suffers from sleep paralysis. You know, that sensation that you are sleeping, but suddenly you are awake, still you cannot move, you can't react, you can't scream, you can't do anything. So it's a mixture of being asleep and awake in a very negative way, because he felt the creature drew the life out of him, sucked the life out of him like a vampire. This is why I'm talking about the Gothic as well.
Now let's see how the life of the main character matches Guy de Maupassant's life. He abused alcohol and drugs, and in his late years he only desired solitude, so he drew himself from society. He also developed paranoia of persecution, allegedly due to syphilis. On January 2nd, 1892, he tried to kill himself by cutting his throat, and finally he was committed to a private asylum where he died.
Which is very similar to what happened to Gérard de Nerval. I mentioned him in another video. Very sad indeed, because Gérard de Nerval saw his own self as a double on a number of occasions, and this caused him confusion and pain, and he ended up committing suicide finally. So, hoping you have liked this analysis and hoping that you will read or have read the story. This analysis is meant to help you understand and enjoy the piece a lot more. So again, if you like the content of these videos, consider subscribing and give me a like. It helps a lot. Thank you for watching and cheers. Bye bye.